I'm Lena Morgan, and for as long as I can remember, I've known something about me just didn't quite fit. Not in a dramatic, life shattering way, but in the quiet, lingering feeling that someone in my own family saw me through a window instead of face to face. That someone was my mother. My dad, on the other hand, was my world. He showed up to everything from science fairs to soccer games, usually the only dad cheering like it was the Super Bowl. He'd braid my hair in the mornings when mom had early classes and tuck me in at night with silly stories and warm hugs that never felt rushed. But my mom, she moved around me like I was furniture, present, polite, sometimes even kind but never warm. She spoke to me with a level of detachment that made me question whether I had done something wrong without realizing it. I used to study her face searching for approval, hoping to catch a smile that wasn't forced. One birthday stands out more than the others. I had just turned 10, and my dad had planned this big backyard party with balloons, a magician, and a chocolate fountain that I couldn't stop staring at. I wore a new dress, one he'd picked out himself, navy blue with tiny silver stars along the hem. He even ordered cupcakes shaped like little books, because I love to read. I remember looking around for mom as the party got going. Guests were arriving, kids were screaming with joy, and I kept scanning for her face. She didn't come out until halfway through, wearing heels like she was headed to a faculty meeting and holding her phone like it might rescue her at any moment. She gave me a side hug, complimented my dress like a stranger would, then disappeared inside again before the magician had even finished his first trick. I didn't realize how much that moment hurt until later that night when I was opening cards and noticed hers wasn't among them. Dad covered for her, said she was busy with a paper she had to finish, but the truth stuck to me like damp air. There were so many moments like that. School plays where she sat stiffly in the back row, then left before the final curtain. Parent-teacher conferences where she sent my dad alone. I started wondering if maybe I reminded her of something she didn't want to remember. Maybe there was something about me that made her feel distant or guilty or cold. As a kid, you don't have the words for that kind of disconnect. You just feel it, and you build little stories in your head to fill the silence. I told myself she was just busy or tired, or that maybe I wasn't trying hard enough to make her proud. I cleaned my room without being told, brought home perfect grades, tried to mimic her tone when I spoke, so maybe she'd feel closer to me. But nothing changed. My dad would beam at me like I hung the moon. He'd gush to his friends about how smart and driven I was. My mom, she'd nod. Sometimes she'd correct my grammar mid-sentence and move on. I'd laugh it off in front of friends, but deep down, it stung more than I wanted to admit. It wasn't that she was mean. She never yelled, never punished unfairly, never made scenes. It was more like she never fully looked at me. And when she did, it was like she was searching for something she expected to see and didn't. I asked her once if I made her proud. We were in the kitchen and she was grading papers with a red pen. She paused for maybe 2 seconds, then said yes flatly, like she was checking off a box. That's when I stopped asking. My dad made up for it in every way he could. He kept showing up, cheering, cooking my favorite meals. He gave me all the warmth I was missing without ever acknowledging that it was missing at all. I think he knew. I think he tried to stretch his love wide enough to cover the gap. Still, it never went away. That question sat in my chest for years, quiet but constant. Why did my mom always look at me like I wasn't hers? We looked like the kind of family you'd see on a holiday card. My dad in a suit, my mom in her pearls, and the three of us kids posed perfectly in front of the fireplace every year like a stock photo. The living room would smell like pine and cinnamon, and everything always looked just right. But standing there with my brothers, I always felt like I was just slightly out of place. My younger brother Josh had our dad's strong jaw and easy charm. My older sister Hannah had inherited mom's elegant features and her sharp, no-nonsense confidence. I had freckles, unruly waves that refused to be tamed, and a nose that didn't match anyone's. I used to squint at our reflection in the glass and wonder why I didn't look like them. My dad never seemed to notice the difference. He treated me like I was made of magic and purpose, always encouraging, always patient. But my mom had a different way of existing around me. She loved order, routine, and predictability, and somehow, I always felt like the part of the plan she didn't account for. At school events, she showed up on time and dressed perfectly, but I could always tell she didn't want to be there. She sat with her arms folded, clapping politely, her eyes rarely meeting mine when I looked her way. At Josh's soccer games, she'd scream from the sidelines. At my piano recital, she didn't even stand when I took my bow. Even in small ways, the difference was there. On Valentine's Day, she used to pack our lunches with little heart-shaped notes. Josh's always had a silly pun or a sticker. Hannah's were filled with encouragement about college applications or scholarships. Mine just said, "Have a good day." I kept them anyway. Family vacations were the same story. We'd go skiing in Colorado or spend a week at the lake house in Michigan. Photos showed us laughing, hiking, sitting around a bonfire. But I remember Mom always being distracted when I spoke. She'd correct my posture in photos, smooth down my dress, then glance past me like she had somewhere better to be. One Christmas, we all opened matching pajamas before bed. Everyone had red and green flannel except mine, which was blue with stars. She told me they were out of my size in the others, but it felt like another reminder that I wasn't really part of the set. My dad noticed and made a joke to lighten the mood, but I could tell he felt the sting too. I started noticing the pattern more as I got older. At Hannah's high school graduation, my mom cried and clung to her like she was sending her off to war. At mine, she handed me a bouquet and told me I'd need to start thinking practically now. I graduated with honors. Hannah barely scraped by. It wasn't jealousy. I loved my siblings and celebrated with them. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was living in a house where everyone had the same book, but I had a different cover. No one said it out loud. No one had to. Once I found an old album tucked in the back of a cabinet. It was filled with baby photos, pages and pages of Hannah and Josh, bath time, first steps, holidays. When I reached the end, I found two blurry pictures of me on the last page. No captions, just stuck there like an afterthought. I didn't say anything. I just put the album back and never looked again. By middle school, I learned to perform my place in the family. I smiled in photos, made small talk at dinner, did my chores before being asked. I earned straight A's and never missed a deadline. I kept hoping that if I got everything right, something would shift. My dad noticed my efforts. He'd brag about me to his friends and always said he was proud. Sometimes I'd catch him watching my mom after I said something smart or did something impressive, like he was silently asking why she couldn't see it too. She'd just nod, take another sip of her coffee, and go back to reading her emails. The worst part wasn't the coldness, it was the indifference. I would have taken anger or even harsh words over that constant emotional blank space. I just wanted to matter, not in a general way, but to her. By high school, I'd stopped trying to win her over. I did well in school because I liked it and because my dad believed in me. I found mentors and teachers who gave the kind of encouragement I'd been craving at home. I got into the honors program, joined the debate team, and volunteered at a local shelter on weekends. Still, nothing ever seemed enough to pull me into her orbit. Once during a family dinner, I made a joke that got everyone laughing. My dad almost choked on his wine. Josh high-fived me. Even Hannah smiled. My mom just looked at me for a moment, then told me to chew with my mouth closed. I smiled anyway, but that moment stuck like a splinter. By the time I applied to colleges, I had stopped asking her to read my essays or help with applications. She didn't offer. My dad proofread every word, made notes in red ink, and hugged me when I hit send on my first one. When I got my acceptance letter to Columbia, he cried. She said it was far from home and asked how I planned to afford New York rent. There were so many tiny moments like that, moments where her words felt like thin ice beneath my feet. Never cruel, just fragile and distant. Like no matter how hard I tried, I would never quite earn her warmth. Sometimes I'd lie awake at night and wonder what I had done. Was I too loud as a kid, too needy? Too different? I would replay old conversations and scan them for mistakes, like there had to be a line I crossed and never noticed. But the older I got, the more I began to suspect the answer had nothing to do with what I'd done. It was about who I was, or maybe who I wasn't. The call came just after midnight. I was in my apartment in Brooklyn, half asleep with a mug of tea cooling on the counter, when my phone lit up with Hannah's name. Her voice was flat, almost mechanical, as she told me Dad had been in a car accident earlier that evening. He didn't make it. I don't remember what I said. I just remember the stillness that followed. It was the kind of silence that doesn't feel quiet, more like everything inside you has suddenly been unplugged. The flight home was a blur. My hands shook the entire way, and I couldn't stop staring at the people around me, wondering if any of them could tell my life had just come undone. I kept replaying our last call in my mind, trying to remember his voice the way he always said "I love you," like it was a promise and not a habit. When I got to the house, it was already full. Neighbors, friends, colleagues from the hospital. The front door kept opening and closing, people bringing casseroles and awkward condolences. I stood on the porch for a long time before going in. Inside, everything smelled like lemon cleaner and too many flowers. Hannah was in the kitchen coordinating meals like it was a fundraiser. Josh sat on the couch with his girlfriend face blank, nodding as someone talked at him about grief. My mom stood by the window, arms crossed, staring out like the backyard held answers none of us could reach. No one noticed me at first. I wasn't surprised. When they did, it was Hannah who hugged me tight and brief, like she wasn't sure if she should let go. My mom said I looked tired, then went back to her silence. I wandered into Dad's office. It smelled like him. Coffee, old paper, and cedar wood from the candles he used to burn while reading. His glasses were still on the desk. His mug half full. I touched the back of his chair and felt the grief crash into me all at once. I had never felt so completely alone. The funeral came quickly. Dad would have hated the fuss. He never liked big crowds or formalities. Still, the church was packed. They read eulogies, shared stories, showed a slideshow of family photos. I couldn't watch. Every picture felt like a paper cut. Afterward, I sat on the back steps while people filed out. Josh came out and sat beside me. He didn't say anything for a long time, just handed me a bottle of water and looked out at the yard. He finally said it didn't feel real. I nodded because anything more than that felt impossible. That night, the house was quiet again. The chaos had faded and all that was left was the hollow. My mom sat in her chair, a glass of wine in one hand and a book she wasn't reading in the other. I wanted to go to her to curl up like I used to with Dad, but I stayed in the hallway. She didn't look up. I slept in my old room surrounded by memories I hadn't touched in years. Posters, journals, the bookshelf he built me when I was 12. I pressed my face into the pillow and let myself cry, real and messy, the kind that steals your breath and leaves you aching. The next morning, I found a voicemail from a number I didn't recognize. It was the law firm that handled Dad's estate. The woman's voice was gentle but clear. She said my father had left a letter addressed to me, separate from the rest of his will. She asked when I could come in to collect it. For a moment, I just stood there holding the phone, heartbeat pounding. A letter. Something meant only for me. My fingers trembled as I dialed her back and set up a meeting for the following afternoon. I didn't tell my family. All day, my thoughts spun. I kept looking at people's faces, wondering if they knew something I didn't, wondering what was inside that envelope. I told myself it was probably just words of comfort, things he didn't get to say. But part of me felt something else, a stirring deep in my chest that I couldn't explain. That night, I stared at the ceiling, too restless to sleep. I thought about every quiet moment we'd shared, every inside joke, every night he brought me soup when I was sick, every time he reminded me I was capable of more than I believed. I thought about how he used to say family wasn't just who you came from, but who stood beside you. The next day, I stood outside the lawyer's office, palms sweaty, heart racing. I wasn't ready, not really, but I opened the door anyway, and I stepped into something I didn't understand yet, something that was about to change everything. The letter was inside a plain white envelope. No return address, just my name in my father's handwriting. Lena. He always wrote my name like it was its own sentence. The lawyer handed it to me with both hands and a quiet nod like she knew this wasn't something she could explain. I sat in my car for nearly an hour before I opened it. The air felt heavy, like the world had paused, waiting for me to read. I unfolded the paper slowly, afraid of what I might find, but more afraid not to know. He started by telling me how proud he was, of the woman I had become, of the kindness I showed the world even when it didn't show it back. I could see his voice in every sentence, the warmth, the patience, the way he never rushed through anything that mattered. Then the words started to shift. He wrote about college, about how he had almost told me the truth before I moved to New York, but didn't want to add weight to my shoulders. He said he had always promised to tell me eventually, but life kept getting in the way. And then he wrote the sentence that changed everything. You weren't supposed to be mine. Not in the way most children are. I read that line 5 times. My vision blurred, but I kept going. He said he met my biological mother when they were both in their 20s. She was someone from his past, someone he had cared about once, but drifted away from. She showed up one day, scared and alone, pregnant and unsure of what to do. She asked him for help, not expecting anything permanent. Just someone kind enough to keep a secret. He had already met my mother by then. They were serious, starting to talk about marriage, but when he saw me for the first time swaddled and blinking at the light, he said something inside him shifted. He couldn't walk away. He offered to raise me as his own no matter what came next. He and my mother fought about it for weeks. She didn't want the complication, didn't want the past brought into the present. But eventually she agreed, on one condition, that it would never be spoken of again. I wasn't an accident, he wrote. I was a decision. a promise he made and never once regretted. He said he chose me in the most intentional way a person can choose. He watched me take my first steps, say my first words, lose my first tooth. He helped me build science projects, wiped my tears when I came home from school heartbroken, and told me bedtime stories about the stars. Not once did he see me as anything but his daughter. By the time I reached the end of the letter, my hands were shaking. My heart felt like it had split wide open. Not in pain, not entirely. It was something harder to name, like sadness and gratitude tangled up in the same breath. He ended the letter with a line that will live in my bones for the rest of my life. Biology never made you mine. Love did, and I would choose you again every single time. I pressed the paper to my chest and sat there with my head against the steering wheel. The world outside kept moving. Cars passed, people walked by. But I stayed still, trying to find myself in the truth he had just given me. For years, I had wondered why my mother kept her distance, why I looked different, why I always felt like a shadow in the corner of our family photos. And now I knew. The answers didn't erase the pain, but they made it make sense. What struck me most wasn't the fact that we didn't share DNA. It was how little that changed how I saw him. If anything, it made his love feel bigger. He didn't have to love me, but he did, every single day, without hesitation, without condition. He chose me. And in doing so, he taught me that family is more than blood. It's commitment, it's presence, it's love that shows up and stays even when no one's watching. That night, I sat on the floor of my childhood bedroom and read the letter again by lamplight. I traced the lines with my fingers, memorizing the way he said things, hearing his voice in my head like he was right there. And for the first time since he died, I didn't feel alone. I felt chosen. I felt loved. I felt his voice in every corner of the silence he left behind. I waited until the house was quiet. The dishes from dinner were still in the sink, and the hum of the dishwasher filled the silence between us. My mom sat in her usual chair by the window, flipping through a magazine without really looking at the pages. I stood across from her, holding the letter in my hand, not sure how to begin. My mouth felt dry and my chest ached in that tight, familiar way that always came with being near her. I asked if she knew what Dad left me. She looked up slowly, eyes settling on the envelope like it might explode. Her expression didn't change much, but something in her shoulders tightened. She asked if I had read it. I nodded once. I asked if it was true, that I wasn't his biologically, that she had wanted to keep it a secret. Her hand closed around the arm of the chair, knuckles pale. She didn't deny it. She just stared out the window again and said it had been complicated. I sat down across from her and waited. The air between us felt sharp like glass. After a long pause, she said it started during a time in her life she didn't like to think about. She was 25, finishing her master's degree and dating a man who wasn't good for her. She got pregnant. He disappeared. She said she panicked. She didn't want to raise a child alone, didn't want to derail her career or face her parents' disappointment. So she went to someone she trusted, someone who had always been kind to her, my dad. He told her he would help, that he would take care of both of us. She said yes, even though her heart hadn't caught up with the decision. She married him, moved forward, pretended the past didn't exist. But every time she looked at me, she said it came back. You reminded me of who I used to be. The version of myself I worked so hard to bury. That's what she said. Not with anger, but with something colder. Like exhaustion, like guilt. I asked her if she ever loved me. Not as an obligation, as a person. She flinched just barely, then said she tried. That she gave me a home, gave me security, gave me what she could. But love had been harder. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just sat there listening to a woman unravel the story of my life like it was an old coat she was finally taking off. She told me she used to lie awake wondering why it was so hard to connect with me, why every kind gesture felt like a performance she couldn't sustain. She said she hated herself for it. But she didn't try to fix it. That part she didn't say. I had grown up under that silence, learned to live with it, tried to earn my way through it, and now, here it was, spelled out like a cold diagnosis. I wasn't broken. I was a reminder. She said she was sorry, not in a dramatic way, just two quiet words that floated into the space between us and disappeared. I nodded. Not because it was enough, but because it was something. I stood up, still holding the letter. She didn't ask to read it. She just sat there looking older than I'd ever seen her. I walked to the hallway and stopped at the edge, turning back one last time. She was staring at the window again, but her face looked softer, like maybe the weight of pretending had finally started to lift. In that moment, I didn't feel healed. I didn't feel whole, but I understood, and sometimes understanding hurts more than anything else. It took weeks to gather the courage, but eventually, I started looking. The letter had given me a name, and from there, it was a matter of slow, careful searching. My biological mother's name was Catherine Mitchell. She lived in Santa Barbara, now married with two teenage sons and a small design business she ran from home. I found a picture of her online and stared at it for what felt like hours. She had the same cheekbones as me, the same warm eyes and auburn hair that skipped a generation in the family I knew. I sent her a letter first. I didn't want to just show up or make a call that could shatter her life in an instant. I kept it short. I told her who I was, what I'd learned, and that I wasn't looking for anything. Just clarity, just a thread of connection if she was willing. She called 2 weeks later. Her voice was softer than I expected. She said she had read my letter 100 times and cried every single time. Then she asked if I would be willing to meet her in person. We chose a coffee shop by the beach. It was quiet, tucked between a surf shop and a bookstore. I wore a blue dress and tried to calm the part of me that still hoped for something magical, something healing. She was already there when I arrived, standing near the window with a latte in her hand and nerves written all over her face. When she saw me, her eyes filled instantly. She didn't speak right away. Neither did I. We just looked at each other, two strangers who weren't really strangers. When we sat down, she reached across the table and touched my hand. Her fingers trembled. She said she had thought about me every year on my birthday, that she kept a small photo of me as a baby hidden in a drawer, that she used to pray late at night hoping I'd found a good life. She told me she was barely 24 when I was born. She had been alone, scared, and ashamed. Giving me to my father felt like the only way forward. He was safe, stable. She never doubted he would love me. She just didn't know if she could face what she had done by keeping me. Then she told me something I didn't expect. Her husband didn't know about me. Her sons didn't either. She had built a life so carefully, so intentionally, and I wasn't part of the story she shared with them. She said she wasn't sure how to explain me, not without tearing things apart. I nodded. It hurt more than I let show, but I understood. She asked if I could give her time. Maybe someday, she said, maybe not now. We walked along the beach after that, just two women making space for silence between words. She asked about my life. I told her about my work, New York, my dad. I didn't cry until I talked about him. She listened without interruption, wiping at her own eyes. When we said goodbye, she hugged me tightly like she meant it. She whispered that she hoped I knew how sorry she was. I told her I did, and I meant it. On the flight home, I watched the clouds roll past and felt strangely calm. There was no happy ending, not the kind I used to dream of. But there was closure, and that felt better than magic. I thought a lot about what it meant to find her. I had imagined the moment so many different ways, sometimes with anger, sometimes with longing. But in the end, what I found was something quieter, a kind of peace I hadn't expected. She didn't offer me a place in her world, but she gave me a piece of my story I had been missing. And I didn't need more than that. Not anymore. For the first time, I didn't walk away feeling rejected. I felt free. I had chased answers for so long, thinking they would somehow fix me. But I wasn't broken. I never was. I was raised by a man who chose me. I had made a life on my own terms. I had asked questions and faced hard truths. And through it all, I had learned the difference between being abandoned and being set on a different path. When I got home, I opened my dad's letter again and read the last line. Love did. That's what stayed with me. Not who left, not who hid, but who showed up. And finally, I had learned how to show up for myself. Some nights I sit on my balcony and think about my dad. Not the man in the photos or the memory shared at his funeral, but the real version. The one who always seemed to know when I needed him even before I did. I remember the day I had my first real heartbreak. I was 15, and some boy in my history class told me I was too intense, too serious, too much. I came home and slammed my bedroom door, face buried in my pillow, trying not to let the sobs escape. Dad didn't knock. He just slid a Hershey bar and a note under the door that said, I love all the parts of you, even the big ones. He was like that, quiet and his love never showy. But it was always there. I felt it in the way he never missed a game or a school play, even if I was just third tree from the left. He always made me feel like I was the star. He used to call me Bird. I asked him why once, and he said, because I was meant to fly. because I didn't just belong in one place and he never wanted to clip my wings. He said it like he had known from the start that I would need freedom to become myself. He taught me how to ride a bike in the church parking lot behind our neighborhood. I fell so many times, but he never lost patience. He'd jog beside me, hand on the seat, telling me to keep my eyes up, not down. When I finally pedaled on my own, I turned to shout something and fell flat on my side. He ran to me laughing, not because I fell, but because I flew first. When I had trouble sleeping, he'd read to me from the same old book of fairy tales, even when I was far too old for them. He said the stories didn't matter as much as the sound of someone you love filling the silence. I didn't understand that then. Now I do. One winter, I got sick just before Christmas. Fever, sore throat, the works. I was miserable, curled on the couch while the rest of the family decorated the tree. He made me a bed out of couch cushions and brought down all the ornaments so I could hand them to him one by one. He let me decide where every single one should go. When I made mistakes, he never made me feel like I had to earn his forgiveness. I crashed his car when I was 17 and cried for hours before he got home. He sat next to me on the porch, handed me a ginger ale, and said he was just glad I was okay. He asked me what I learned, and when I told him, he said that was enough. The day I left for college, he hugged me so tightly I couldn't breathe. He whispered that he was proud of me, not just for getting in, but for being brave enough to go. Then he pulled a tiny envelope out of his coat pocket and told me not to open it until I felt lost. I kept it in my wallet for 3 years. When I finally opened it during a rough night in my dorm, it just said, "You've always known the way home." There were no grand speeches or perfect words. He didn't make everything better, but he stayed. He showed up, and he loved me with this steady, quiet strength that never wavered. When I found out he wasn't my biological father, the ground under me shifted. But the foundation he had built held strong, because nothing about our story had changed. He still held my hand when I was scared. He still showed up to every big moment. He still taught me what love was supposed to feel like. I used to wonder what made someone a parent. I thought it was biology or paperwork or legal names, but now I know. It's presence, it's intention, it's choosing someone every day and showing them they matter. My dad did that, without fanfare, without needing credit. He gave me a kind of love that didn't depend on where I came from. It depended on who I was and how he saw me even when I didn't see myself clearly. That kind of love doesn't die with a person. It lives on in the way I treat others, in the way I show up for myself, in the way I build the life he always believed I could have. Some nights I still talk to him. I tell him about my work, my thoughts, the new things I'm learning. I imagine his responses. I hear the warmth in his laugh. And even though he's not here, I still feel held. He may not have shared my blood, but he gave me everything that matters. He chose me, and that choice healed something in me I didn't know was broken. A father's love is not measured by DNA. It's measured by the footprints left on your heart, and his are everywhere. For most of my life, I thought family was something fixed. A name, a set of faces in a photo, a story you didn't get to write. I believed love had to come from the people who raised you, and if it didn't, there was something wrong with you. But now I know family is something you build. It's not made in biology or bound by history. It's made in small choices in who shows up and who stays when things get hard. The people who love you consistently, who see you clearly and choose you anyway, those are the ones who deserve to be called family. Sometimes that's a parent, sometimes it's a friend, a partner, or someone who comes into your life later and makes a space for you. Sometimes it's someone you never expected. What I've learned is that real family doesn't need to match you. They don't need to look like you or share your blood. They just need to love you in a way that makes you feel safe and seen. My dad did that. He may not have been my father by birth, but he loved me with a quiet, unwavering presence that gave me roots. And in the end, that's what mattered most. I hope my story reminds you that your worth isn't measured by who didn't love you or who left. It's shaped by the people who stay, by the people who choose you, and the people you choose back. So now this is my definition of family. It's not something you're born into. It's something you create. And when you create it with care, it can be stronger than anything written on paper. If you've ever felt like an outsider in your own story, I see you. You're not alone. And I'd love to hear from you. What's your definition of family? Share it in the comments. I read them all. And sometimes just knowing someone else understands can be its own kind of healing.